My name is Jessica. This is my persuasive speech, the intersection of unhoused individuals and the criminal justice system. The National Homelessness Center states 187 cities have enacted laws to criminalize life-sustaining acts such as eating, sleeping, resting, or sitting in public places. We have all heard the word homelessness. From this point forward in my speech, I will refer to that stigmatizing word to vulnerable population or unhoused individual. Today, we will talk about advocates who are for locking up these individuals for simply being unhoused, advocates who stand for change in our broken system. And finally, we will touch on how we can make a difference as a community. To criminalize an unhoused individual means to cite or arrest for simply doing vital acts as a human being in public. We all eat, sleep, rest, sit down. The only difference between us and the vulnerable population is we have a roof over our head and they do not. We have all seen an unhoused individual in our life. In my early 20s, I experienced a time of being unhoused. I am grateful today to speak on an issue I am passionate about. Now, let's talk about those who would like to criminalize and lock up the vulnerable population. These advocates for criminalizing cite this as justification because they do not want to see unhoused individuals cluttering or littering the streets. They claim it disturbs the aesthetic of the city or town. They claim encampments that block stores diminish prosperity for business. They say citizens are reluctant to go shopping at those businesses due to outbursts and at times violent interaction. We can agree that some of this is due to stigma. Some, not all encampments provide an opportunity for the sale of drugs. They are accessible because the individuals selling the drugs are exploiting the circumstances of the unhoused population. This results in crime and substance use disorder being prevalent. In some cities, businesses do not allow the unhoused to use their public restroom simply because they are unhoused. This invokes public health concerns. Lack of sanitary resources make it easier for disease to spread. Did you know being unhoused is a health issue? According to a 2019 fact sheet from the National Healthcare for the Homeless Council, unhoused people have higher rates of illness and die around 12 years earlier than the general U.S. population. Not only can they be physically ill because of lack of resources, but also can carry mental health issues, followed by increased stress for not having stable housing, make a person more susceptible to turn to substances. The policies in place to criminalize the unhoused include citations, fees, or in extreme cases, jail time. In Tennessee, it is illegal to camp on public property. It is a Class E felony and carries 6 years in prison. Now that we have covered those who want to condemn the vulnerable population, let us talk about the advocates who are passionate to make changes in our broken system. To sleep, eat, sit, rest is vital to a human. These advocates who are for making changes and do not support the criminalization of the unhoused state that these acts are inevitable. And if there are no local shelters or long waiting lists to get into these shelters, the unhoused should not be penalized for it. In 2018, an unhoused individual by the name of Martin sued the city of Boise, Idaho, claiming the city was violating his Eighth Amendment by not allowing him to sleep in a public area because he had nowhere else to go. Here is a summary of the case.
Homelessness is a major problem in most big cities. Although finding a solution is generally a matter of politics, not law, the Constitution forecloses some policies, as seen in Martin versus City of Boise. Robert Martin and other homeless individuals living in Boise had been cited for violating at least one of two city ordinances. The first ordinance prohibited using public property, such as streets or parks, as a permanent or temporary residence. The second ordinance prohibited occupying or sleeping in any building or structure, public or private, without the owner's consent. Martin sued, seeking both retrospective relief for his prior convictions and injunctive relief against further prosecution. After he filed suit, Boise modified the law, prohibiting enforcement of the ordinances when the city homeless shelters were full. The district court granted summary judgment to the city. Martin appealed to the Ninth Circuit.
Although Idaho did not rule in favor of Martin, when he appealed and went to the federal court, he won the civil lawsuit, making a step forward and progress in the country when the federal court ruled in his favor. There are 4 things that municipal attorneys feel confident saying regarding Martin. Cities cannot criminally punish a person who is experiencing homelessness from sitting, sleeping, or lying on public property. 2, cities are not required to build or provide shelters for persons experiencing homelessness. 3, cities can continue to impose reasonable time and place and manner restrictions, even on people who are homeless, have a place to find shelter, and don't wish to use that shelter. Components of an effective housing crisis response system: outreach and coordinated entry, prevention and diversion, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing. Advocates who are for making changes in the system state arresting the unhoused individual violates their rights as citizens and dignity. They also say locking up the vulnerable population does not solve the problem. For some, not having a home is not by choice, rather, unfortunate circumstances. The country should focus on the root of the problem. such as mental health and affordable housing. Arresting the unhoused only adds to more burdens and leaves the unhoused individuals traumatized and isolated. The individuals are already going through financial crisis. Arresting adds fines and impacts their criminal record, adding to the frustration and creating barriers to get a job or resources. Incarcerating the vulnerable population is more costly than creating housing units with low barrier requirements. The Martin versus Boise civil lawsuit in Idaho left other states questioning their approach to the unhoused when a federal court sided with Martin, an unhoused individual. Just when we thought our country was making progress, there was a 2024 civil lawsuit in Grants Pass, Oregon, where an unhoused individual named Johnson was suing Grants Pass, Oregon for violating their Eighth Amendment, saying it was cruel and unusual punishment to cite them for camping in public land when they had nowhere else to go. However, the federal court did not side with the unhoused individual. Here is a video on the Supreme Court ruling about Grants Pass.
We're coming on air with breaking news right now. The Supreme Court has ruled cities can enforce bans on homeless people sleeping outdoors in West Coast areas where shelter space is lacking. The Grants Pass case decided today is the most significant to come before the High Court in decades on the issue, and comes as a rising number of people in the U.S. are without a permanent place to live. The High Court struck down a ruling by San Francisco-based appeals court that found outdoor sleeping bans amount to cruel and unusual punishment. Leaders in the West had argued the lower court ruling made it harder for them to manage outdoor encampments, encroaching on sidewalks and other public spaces. The Supreme Court just ruled 6-3 in favor of Grants Pass.
The federal court sided with Grants Pass, saying they can enforce anti-camping laws in Oregon. This was a step backwards in our system. Each state was left to regulate the issue as they choose. It was then we began to see an uptick on law enforcement harassing unhoused individuals and arresting them or asking them to move, even though they had nowhere to go. Finally, let's talk about solutions. Antonia Fasnelli from the National Homelessness Law Center states, "It makes no sense to criminalize homelessness. Johnson versus Grants Pass is a case about people who are unhoused, who are being punished for something that is out of their control. They've already lost their housing and literally have nowhere else to go." We can agree to criminalize an unhoused individual is cruel and counterproductive. What solves homelessness are homes, not fines and jails. The United States is in a severe housing crisis. Criminalizing the unhoused is expensive. Elected officials provide funding for these matters, and now they have a choice. Some laws threaten to withhold money going to shelters or nonprofits that help the unhoused individuals if law enforcement does not enforce anti camping laws. Meaning, if law enforcement does not enforce these individuals to keep moving from public places, the local government will not give money to the resources that help the vulnerable population. As a community, we must inform ourselves and vote for local changes in our cities or towns and better approaches to get down to the root of some causes, such as substance use disorder or mental health treatment, reducing stigma, affordable housing, and even safe consumption sites. In Sacramento County, a tiny home community helps the unhoused. In Houston, Texas, they cut 2/3 of unhoused population by collaborating with federal funds to create housing that offer but do not require substance use disorder or mental health treatment. Fewer tents, more homes. There is no quick or one-size-fits-all solution to solve the unhoused issue. Massive funding in the past decade was given to help veterans that are unhoused find a place to live. This issue exists in all communities. It is time to embrace change and let go of stigma. It is my hope that you have grown to empathize with the unhoused individual you might see on the street. And if you are brave enough, stand up for the vulnerable population by going to your local city hall to voice your opinions or in the career you choose. Blaming, criminalizing, and moving people from streets to jails does not solve the issue or fix the broken system. Today, we talked about advocates who want to lock up the vulnerable population as a solution. We also talked about advocates who are passionate for changing the broken system. And finally, we talked about the solutions that we can all do if we unite as a community. My intent is to make you realize this issue is not going away, even if we incarcerate every single unhoused individual. Inform yourself on your local elected officials running your state and your city. Now, think of that unhoused individual you have seen. Put yourself in their shoes for 5 minutes. Now, ask yourself, what is the solution? We need a united voice for housing, not handcuffs. Thank you.